The man behind the counter looked at me like I was dirt on his shoe. "We don't serve people like you here," he said, loud enough for the whole showroom to hear. I was standing there in a torn hoodie, my sneakers falling apart, holding an envelope with $400,000 in cash inside it. $400,000 in my hand? And he still told me to leave. You're probably thinking, how does a billionaire end up getting thrown out of a car dealership? Stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about money. This is a story about the day I found out exactly what people think of me when they don't know who I am. And by the end of this video, I think you're going to look at people differently too. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is where I came from. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom, my little sister, and sometimes my uncle when he had nowhere else to go. We didn't have much. Some nights, dinner was bread with sugar on it because that's all we had left before payday. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen, thinking we were asleep. She was doing math in her head. Rent. Electric bill. My sister's school shoes. There was never enough for everything. I used to walk to school in shoes that had holes in the bottom. I'd put cardboard inside them when it rained. Kids noticed. Kids always notice. They'd laugh. They'd whisper. And I learned really young what it feels like to be looked at like you're less than everyone else. You might be wondering, how did a kid like that end up a billionaire? Honestly, I ask myself that too some nights. I worked. That's the short answer. I worked harder than anyone I knew. I started selling things in middle school: candy, phone cases, anything I could flip for a few dollars. By high school, I had a small online business. By 22, that business became something real. By 30, it became something huge. But here's the thing nobody tells you about becoming successful. The money changes. The bank account changes. But you? You don't change. Not really. Not deep down. I still remember what it feels like to be hungry. I still remember what it feels like to be laughed at. And no amount of zeros in my bank account ever made that feeling go away. That's important. Remember that. Because it's the whole reason what happened next happened. So here's the setup for that day at the dealership. My daughter was turning 18. She'd worked hard in school, she never asked me for anything extravagant her whole life, and I wanted to surprise her with her first car. Nothing crazy, just something safe and nice. Something she'd actually chosen herself from a magazine cutout she kept on her wall for 2 years. I had a rule for myself, even after I made it. I never wanted my kids to grow up not knowing the value of things. So I never flaunted money in front of them, and I never flaunted it in public either. Most days, you'd never guess what I was worth just by looking at me. I wore old sneakers. I drove a beat-up truck I'd had since my 20s. People assumed I was nobody. And honestly, I liked it that way. That morning, I didn't dress up. I didn't call ahead. I didn't bring my assistant or my usual driver. I just grabbed cash from the safe, put on my hoodie, and drove myself to the dealership like a regular guy running an errand. I remember walking in and feeling that little flutter of excitement. Like a kid myself. I couldn't wait to see her face when she saw that car in the driveway. I found the car. Exact color she wanted. Exact model. I waved down a salesman. He looked at me for maybe 2 seconds. Up and down. My hoodie. My sneakers. My old truck outside the window. And something in his face just shut off. "Can I help you?" he said, but not the way you say it when you actually want to help someone. The way you say it when you want someone gone. I told him I was interested in the car. Told him I wanted to pay in full, in cash, that day. He laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly. Worse. A tired laugh. Like he'd heard this 100 times from guys who wasted his time. "Sir, this car is $98,000. Do you understand that?" I said yes. I understood that. He didn't believe me. You could see it on his face. He didn't even try to hide it. He told me maybe I should look at the used lot down the street. He said it real slow, like I might not understand English that well. He said, "People like you usually can't afford something like this, and I'd probably be more comfortable somewhere else." People like you. I'd heard that phrase before. A long time ago. From teachers. From landlords. From a loan officer who once told my mother she didn't fit the profile for an apartment we desperately needed. And here I was again, decades later, worth more money than that entire dealership could sell in 10 years, and still hearing the exact same words. I asked to speak to the manager. The salesman actually smirked. He said the manager was busy and wouldn't want to waste his time either. That's when I set the envelope on the counter. $400,000 in cash, meant for a foundation donation later that week, but I had it with me that morning. I said, "Count it. Then tell me again that I can't afford this car." The room went quiet. You'd think that moment would feel satisfying. Like some kind of movie scene where the bad guy finally gets what's coming to him. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt heavy. It felt sad. Because in that silence, while the salesman's face turned white, while another employee ran to grab the manager, all I could think about was every single time in my life someone had looked at me and decided I didn't matter. Before I had money. When I actually didn't have money. The manager came rushing out, all smiles suddenly, apologizing over and over, saying there'd been some huge misunderstanding, asking if I wanted coffee, water, anything at all. Funny how fast people change their tone once they realize what's in your bank account. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want an apology from a man who hadn't even seen what happened. I wanted to talk to the salesman. Just him. Alone. I asked him one question. "If I'd walked in here in a suit, driving a nice car, would you have treated me the same way?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both already knew. I told him I still wanted to buy the car. Full price, cash, no discount, nothing special. I wasn't there to punish anyone or make a scene. I just wanted my daughter's car. But I told him something else too. I told him that the way he looked at me in that first 5 seconds, that's the same way people looked at my mother when she was trying to keep a roof over our heads. That's the same way people looked at me as a kid with cardboard in my shoes. And I told him that judgment, that split-second decision to write someone off because of what they're wearing, it doesn't just lose you a sale. It tells the world exactly who you are. Now, you might think that's the end of the story. Guy gets disrespected, guy reveals he's rich, everyone apologizes, credits roll. But that's not real life. Real life doesn't wrap up that clean. Because that night, driving home with the car being delivered separately, I wasn't thinking about the salesman anymore. I was thinking about something a lot deeper. Something that had been sitting in my chest for years, honestly, long before that day. I started thinking about how many times I do this too. How many times had I looked at someone, a waiter, a cashier, a stranger on the street, and made a quiet judgment in half a second, just like that salesman did to me? How many times had money changed the way I saw other people, even without me realizing it? That hit me harder than the rejection itself. I went home that night and I couldn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, the real one, not for show, the one where I actually make my coffee every morning, and I just sat there thinking about my mom. About those nights with bread and sugar. About how she used to say, "Baby, people will always judge what they can see. Character they can't see. That's the only thing that's really yours." I hadn't thought about that in years. And here I was, decades later, a man worth more money than I ever imagined possible as a kid, and I got treated exactly the way my mother got treated at that leasing office all those years ago. Nothing had changed. Not really. Only the size of my bank account. That messed me up for a few days, honestly. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I went through this weird period where I started testing people. I'd go into stores dressed down, just to see how I'd be treated. Some places were kind, genuinely kind, no matter what I looked like. Other places, it was the same story over and over. The hoodie. The sneakers. The assumptions. It made me angry for a while. Then it made me sad. Then, eventually, it made me want to actually do something with it. Here's the turning point of this whole story. This is the part one really want you to hear. About 3 weeks after the dealership incident, I couldn't stop thinking about that salesman's face. Not out of anger anymore. Out of something closer to recognition. Because the truth is, he wasn't a monster. He was just a guy doing what a lot of us do without even noticing. Judging a book by its cover. Deciding someone's worth based on what they can see in 5 seconds, instead of who that person actually is. I decided I wanted to turn that whole experience into something bigger than my own ego. So I did something I'd never done before. I went back to that dealership. Not with cameras, not with lawyers, not to complain to corporate. Just me. I asked to speak to the salesman again. His name was Daniel, by the way. Late 20s. Trying to support his mom and a younger brother, it turned out, working long shifts on commission just to make ends meet. I told him I wasn't there to get him fired. His shoulders actually dropped with relief. I could see how scared he'd been the past few weeks, worried this was going to cost him his job. Instead, I told him something different. I told him I wanted to fund a scholarship. Something for kids exactly like I used to be, kids growing up without much, kids who get overlooked because of how they look or where they come from. I told him I wanted him to help me pick the first recipients, because I wanted someone who understood what it feels like to misjudge and be misjudged both, to be part of it. He didn't say much at first. I think he was in shock. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I judged you because I've spent years watching people who dress like you walk in here and waste my time, and I got tired of hoping. I stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt because it kept costing me." And honestly, that broke my heart a little. Because I understood that too. I understood what it's like to get burned so many times that you build walls, that you stop trusting, that you start protecting yourself by assuming the worst about people before they get the chance to disappoint you. That was the real turning point for me. Not proving him wrong with a stack of cash. Understanding why he was wrong in the first place. Understanding that judgment usually comes from pain, not evil. From people protecting themselves, even when it means hurting someone else in the process. So here's where things landed. We started that scholarship. It's small still, nothing flashy, no big press conference, no announcement online. Just quiet support for kids who remind me of myself. Kids with holes in their shoes and dreams too big for their circumstances. Daniel actually still works with us now, part-time, helping run interviews for the applicants. He told me once that doing this work changed how he sees every single customer that walks through those doors now. He said he catches himself sometimes, about to make a snap judgment, and he stops. He actually looks at the person instead. That, to me, mattered more than any apology ever could. As for my daughter, she loved the car, by the way. She had no idea about any of what happened that day until months later when I finally told her the whole story over dinner. She got quiet for a second, and then she asked me something that really stuck with me. She asked, "Dad, does it still hurt? Even after everything you've built?" And I told her the truth. Yes. It still hurts. Money doesn't heal that kind of thing. Success doesn't erase the memory of being looked down on. If anything, it makes those moments hit even harder, because you realize some people will never really see you. They'll only ever see what you're wearing, what you're driving, what you look like walking through the door. But here's what I've learned, and this is the real lesson I want to leave you with today. You cannot control how people judge you. You never could, and you never will. People will size you up in 5 seconds based on nothing real at all. That's just human nature, unfortunately. It happened to me as a broke kid. It happened to me as a billionaire in a hoodie. It will probably happen to you too, in some way, at some point, no matter who you are or what you have. But you can control something else. You can control whether you become that same kind of person to somebody else. Every single person you meet, the cashier, the waiter, the guy in the worn-out sneakers standing in the dealership, they are carrying something you cannot see. A whole life. A whole story. Struggles you'll never know about just by looking at their clothes or their car or their zip code. I think about my mom a lot when I think about this story. She never got to see any of this. She never got to see me buy that car for my daughter, or start that scholarship, or become who I became. But everything I do, every choice I make about how I treat people, comes from her. From those nights in the kitchen. From that phrase she said to me more times than I can count. People will always judge what they can see. Character they can't see. That's the only thing that's really yours. So here's what I want to leave you with today. If you've ever been that person, dismissed, underestimated, looked at like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, what you drive, where you come from, I want you to hear this clearly. That was never about your worth. That was about someone else's limited vision. Someone who couldn't see past the surface, because they were never taught how, or because life hurt them enough that they stopped trying. You don't need anyone's approval to know your own value. Not a salesman's. Not a stranger's. Not mine. And if you're someone who's caught yourself judging someone else too fast, and honestly, we all have, myself included, I hope this story makes you pause the next time. Just for a second. Before you decide who someone is based on what they're wearing. Because you never know who's really standing in front of you. You never know who's carrying $400,000 in an envelope, or a lifetime of struggle behind their eyes, or a story that would completely change how you see them if you just gave them the chance. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about someone in your own life, drop a comment and tell me. I read every single one. Tell me about a time someone judged you before they knew you. Or a time you judged someone else, and later realized you were wrong. And if you want more real stories like this one, raw, honest, no filters, make sure you subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. It meant a lot to finally tell it. I'll see you in the next video.